To give light to this film of mine, I tried to find the meaning of a little word that likes to hide everywhere. It is goodness. I beg you to tell me if you find it here in these images, if you recognize it at least here and there. Those are words from Vittorio De Sica on his 1951 film, Miracolo in Milan. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about Miracolo in Milan. So quick synopsis of the film is: an open-hearted, unrelentingly energetic orphan struggles to make the best of his life on the streets of Milan. The film stars Francesco Golisano as Toto, Emma Grammatica as La Vecchia Lolota, Giuliano Barnabo as Moby, Brunello Bovo as Edwige, and Anna Karenina as Marta. It's written by Cesare Zavattani, Vittorio De Sica, Suso Cecchi D'Amico, Mario Chiari, and Adolfo Franchi. Cinematography by G.R. Aldo. Directed by Vittorio De Sica. Edited by Eraldo da Roma. Music by Alessandro Cicognini. Costumes by Mario Chiari. And special effects by Ned Mann. All right, this is the first episode in the De Sica series. This is a director who I hold very dear to me and been wanting to obviously discuss his films for quite a while. And it's wild that at least one of his films didn't pop up earlier than this, but better late than never. It was great revisiting and also exploring other films within his body of work that I hadn't seen. So I hope you enjoy the series. I hope that you are inspired to go beyond his more popular films because he's got a great body of work, and you should definitely rewatch any of the films that you've already seen, but you haven't seen them in a long time. And with that, here's episode 1 of the series. Today, my guests are Hannah and Bryan Loomis from What a Picture podcast. They've been on before. Actually, we've done 2 episodes together before, one with both of them and one with Bryan, and now we have them both back. Beyond excited. We did All the President's Men and I Was Born Bud for the Gordon Willis series and Ozu series, respectively.
Yeah, I couldn't get Hannah to come on for a silent movie, but yeah.
We watch a lot of movies. I'm a multifaceted person when it comes to my interests, and finite amount of silent film.
That's fair. The one that Bryan did suggest, I'd been wanting to watch, so I was excited to watch it, but I don't get to cover that many silents, so I did jump at that chance to do it. But before we even get into what we're talking about today, which is Miracolo in Milan, you guys have your own podcast, What a Picture. I listened to the most recent one, and I usually catch up with all this stuff, but The Gleaners and I was great because I'm a big Varda fan. Love that episode, and realize that you guys are nearing the end of the Sight and Sound list.
Yeah.
How are you guys feeling about that?
Great. It's like being at the end of climbing a very tall mountain. Yeah, covering 100 film list on a podcast is it feels like a giant project that you're undertaking, and it's going to take us a little over 2 years to get all the way through. But it's the type of thing that I enjoy doing. I've always, since I was little, sort of created projects for myself, and I'm sort of a completionist. Hannah is too, and so works well in that regard, where we're getting towards the end here, and the podcast will continue. The plan is for the podcast to continue.
I feel like it's less of climbing a mountain and more of like stepping towards the edge of a cliff, because we don't know where we're falling to when we're done with the list, but in a good way.
Yeah,
I think my own it's not excitement, but when we kind of planned out what we were going to watch, we back-ended a lot of the really, really, really long movies, because we're like, if we don't do this whole list, that means we don't have to watch Showa.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure will be great. But that will also be movie number 99 because it's 8.5 hours long. And so we've got a good, I don't know how many super long ones we have left.
We've got another 4.5 hour one that we're actually going to do in a week and a half called Histories of Cinema. It's a Godard docu series sort of thing, or film. Yeah. should be interesting. And then there's another 3-hour Tarkovsky movie for us to watch.
I love this.
So,
yeah. No, it's been a fun exercise. I think it was something that we probably wouldn't have, because we talked about, let's do this anyway. It'd be fun to do a podcast. And if we weren't doing the podcast, I would have bailed on this, like watching through all the movies together 18 months ago.
Yeah.
Not that they're not great. I would have picked out, I want to see this one, this one, and then kind of scrapped the rest. And so it's been a nice exercise in like forcing myself to be exposed to things that I wouldn't normally gravitate towards. I don't know that it makes me, I've loved every movie we've watched, but it's all led to like fun discussion and meeting fun other podcasters. So it's been enjoyable.
No, that's cool. Every time I look at the Sight and Sound, like I've seen a good chunk, but there's still quite a few I haven't seen. So it's good to have like podcasts to be like, well, I can only listen to this episode if I've watched the movie. So it pushes me to watch, the episode or the films I haven't seen. So I'm excited to see what you guys have next. No pressure, but I'm sure it'll be a great time.
We're excited too, Felicia. We don't know what it is, but it's going to be something.
Speaking of Sight and Sound, there's a director who's on this list, De Sica. And so I know that you've watched other films from him. Curious to hear what your relationship is to his work. Are you interested in his other work? Is he someone that you kind of seek out the rest of his filmography in any way?
Yeah, I can take that one first. So yeah, we've both seen Bicycle Thieves for our podcast. We also had you on early on our podcast, maybe a year or a little more ago, to talk about The Earrings of Madame Day that De Sica acts in. So that's really fun as well. I've seen more other stuff. Hannah, I don't think you've seen any others than that, but I'm not the biggest neo-realist fan in general. I tend to prefer like surrealist or expressionist or like some of those early like non-real types of genre. I'm like, there's such interesting things going on here. But neorealism is incredibly important and sets the groundwork for a lot of what's to come and in the future. So I've sought out some from a sort of understanding their historical importance, and I do really like De Sica and Rossellini films. So other De Sica I've seen Umberto D, Shoeshine, and Divorce Italian Style, which is not really neorealist, but I also love that one.
The great title. So, I'm sure it's a great movie just based on the title. Like, how fun. Makes you think they're just like throwing pasta at each other.
Pretty much.
And their big arguments. And that makes it fun.
Yeah, so I generally like De Sica. I think his perspective and the neorealist perspective coming out of the war in Italy is so important to sort of dive into the possibilities of cinema to speak to like a time in a country's life and social issues. You really get that in quite profound way in these like late 40s, early 50s Italian neorealist films.
Mm.
Yeah, and I had only seen Bicycle Thieves, which I really loved. I could not have defined what a neorealistic movie is until I looked at the Wikipedia page, which I'm staring at right now, and realizing that these are all themes that I do gravitate towards in movies. Not that it's the only things I like in movies, or perhaps I like these neorealism themes, and then maybe like expounded upon with maybe more grandiose gestures, things like that. But things that look at social constructs, political constructs, progressive issues, looking at like plights of underrepresented types of characters or repressed characters and those themes. I think, Bryan, the interesting point of coming out of World War II and Italy, like looking at itself, but some introspection after things like that. And so I do gravitate towards this. So giving it a title is helpful for me.
Yeah, definitely.
But I really liked Bicycle Thieves. I thought it was lovely and heartbreaking. And this one felt like if Bicycle Thieves and It's a Wonderful Life had a baby, it would be Miracle Milan. So that's fun.
Actually a perfect way to describe this movie, actually. I love that.
Yeah.
I want to hold on to the concept of realism because we will chat about that, because I've read quite a few pieces of criticism on this and the idea that does this fit into the genre. So we can talk about that for sure. But we can get into the film itself in the first segment, personal thoughts, and talk about the story. if you, the listener, are familiar, you probably at least have heard of or seen Bicycle Thieves, maybe Umberto D as well. He does have other comedies that he's done, but he's probably most known for his really sad stuff. There's sad stuff in the way that are not, like, I don't feel like they're attacking the audience to make you feel sad. It's just sad because you're an empathetic person, I assume. And it's often involving children, so that's very hard not to feel, sad and cry. So I always associate with him with that. When I first saw this one, though, I kept waiting for it to make me cry the same way the other stuff does. And I feel like I did tear up in a way where I was just like so hopeful and happy. And I love that about this movie. And it was so great rewatching it. I'm wondering how you guys feel about the way he tackles this in this film, because I think in the hands of another director, it could feel ungenuine. It could feel a little cheesy, but it's done so beautiful, even with, the special effects that are done in this. I don't know how he pulled it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like this movie was made almost like a fable to like a 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like he was trying to take these themes that he wants to get across and give them to a child, like a child big enough or old enough, mature enough to understand the plights of capitalism, but also not one that you would want to also hammer home the morals of like kindness and faith and love and how those all intertwine. So it does. I agree. Like it could veer towards cheesy really easily. I think the cheesier aspects were a little bit more of like, wait, what's going on here? Like, what's this weird flagpole thing? What's this dove? What's these angels? But I think it hammers home a lot of the desire, like what greed can do within established society, what new greed can do within the unhoused, shantytown type community. And it's given to you in a very obvious way, almost like a fable would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. It actually made me reflect, which I'm sure we'll get into more. It made me reflect on De Sica's other work and find some of these like elements of humor or playfulness, I think, in some of those other films that you think of as more like somber, like Umberto D, Bicycle Thieves, Shisha, those other neorealist films. There are these elements of like real humanness, and that's really what comes through in this film. These characters just feel very real and human. You've got definitely, there's these supernatural elements and effects and things that you don't typically see in a neorealist film, but it's all very grounded in, let's look at poverty and what's going on in these poor communities in Italy right after the war in a way that feels definitely neorealist. So I'd say more like neorealist elements rather than fully a neorealist film, but it definitely like fits in with what the De Sica project, but made me reconsider his other work in an interesting way of like, oh yeah, he sort of is always doing this in a way that you wouldn't think.
Yeah, I think even like his saddest stuff does have a glimmer of hope in there. I think he just likes to be realistic about, the plight of people and how long it's going to take for them to recover after something like a Second World War. That I do appreciate from him. And he did this one with his longtime collaborator. So it is based on a book, and the person who wrote the book, Cica and Zavattani, also co-wrote this one, and they've been collaborating for years and continued to collaborate on stuff. But De Sica specifically wanted to make something that was a bit more uplifting because he's like, I've been doing a lot of depressing films. I'd like to make something that'll make people smile. But so it has both of their voices in there because they did co-write the script together. So the happiness and the hope is coming from De Sica, and because Zavattani was a communist and he was very anti-capitalist, you still have those elements in there. So it's a good mix of both, and they never feel like they're hammering it too hard into the audience. But I do love that it opens up with kind of like a title card that says Once Upon a Time. And like you said, Hannah, it does introduce like the fable element. And the score is very whimsical. So you're kind of immediately like, okay, I know what the tone is going to be. So even when it gets to the more fantastical parts in the end, towards the end, you're like, well, okay, they did set it up. So with all that, and knowing that this is 1951 Italy and not America, where they're already sort of introducing special effects or practical effects, but you don't often see them in Europe at this point, especially not in neo-realist films. How did you feel seeing those scenes with the special effects? And obviously, yeah, a little bit dated, but I think it looks great.
I was so delighted by the special effects in this. So yeah, you've got, I mean, there, if you go back to sort of the beginnings of cinema and those early silents, Zamelier and Murnau sort of stuff. So you've got a lot of these Phantom Carriage as well. You've got a lot of these like double exposure sort of things going on, or exploring the possibilities that you can do on film rather than just seeing something in person. And then got sort of this gap once the sound era hits to some degree, where there's less of this type of thing going on, and we're more focused on dialogue, characters, realism for sort of a long period of time, until maybe like the late 60s, early 70s, things really pick back up. So seeing a film like smack dab in the middle of that, and like you said, from Europe, where it was less common to have more effects driven films, was like, wow, I didn't know they were doing this at this point. I thought it was all like before and after sort of stuff. So I loved it. I thought they were really well done. There's something charming, I think, about seeing effects that you can sort of, if you have a little bit of familiarity with the medium, you can sort of tell how they did it. And it obviously doesn't look 100% real, but there's something charming in the non-realness that's really compelling to me, of like, it's not real, but because you can see like, okay, this was shot on film using these techniques, and I can sort of tell, okay, you know, they used rear projection here or double exposure here. It still feels very tangible in a way that maybe like CGI today does not as much, because it's all computers.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting it to be like really good technology. And I imagine audiences were like, what?
Yeah.
You know, like it's 50s or 40s or 50s or whatever. How is this happening? So that was sweet. I thought it kind of felt a little bit out of left field, but also just how he had such a sweet relationship with his mother, and that like she showed him even in their short time together, so like what kindness is, that she's able to kind of, just from a storyline standpoint, reinvigorate him with courage that comes from doing the right thing. So I didn't need it to be, from a special effects standpoint, like phenomenal. I just was happy to see that like the truth and the morals that he grew up with are still what's guiding him in this situation. The angels were a little too underdressed for my comfort level. Like the two angels chasing her around, it's like, put a loincloth on, but that's my only qualm. I'm just a prude, I guess, when it comes to my spectral beings. I want them fully clothed. I don't know.
Yeah, I did. I remember when the first time I watched this, really not reading into it. So when all that started, I was like, wow, okay, we're really going out there, but I thought it worked. He brought in American special effects artist Ned Mann, and this was his last film, but he was one of the earlier adopters of that art in film. I was looking at his filmography. So far, I've only seen one, which is Divorce of Lady X. But it's interesting that he, you know, obviously had to outsource, because that probably didn't really have that many people in Italy at the time who would have been familiar with that type of art when it comes to film. So I thought that was great. We're going to continue talking about the story throughout as we go. But one of the last points I wanted to bring up before I pass it back to you on your last thoughts for the personal thoughts section was, there is a scene in this film, and I feel like I need to mention it, where there's a mix of blackface and whiteface on this.
Yeah, weird.
I had completely forgotten about it. I won't lie. I completely forgotten about it. And I'm not here to tell anyone how they should feel about it. I, as someone who is half black myself, it kind of made me chuckle a little bit. I was like, I'm not offended. Obviously, it didn't need to be done, but I think the intention behind it was not malicious. That's the only reason why I'm not offended, in the sense that these are two characters from different backgrounds, and they're just trying to find acceptance in their love, and in their mindset, that's the only way they can do it, is by becoming each other's race. It's silly, but it's also a commentary on race relations at the time, especially in Italy, still in Italy, to be honest. As someone who's also half Italian, but grew up in Canada, I know how it is over there, unfortunately. So, yeah, how did you feel about that? Let's see, it's so brief, but I just remember being like, oh man, I have to mention it.
Yeah. Well, I think because you shared your race, we'll share our races as we are both very white. And so I think when it happened, we were like, oh, well, let Felicia take this one. I mean, I'm not going to go into the history of blackface, but we did talk about, like, you know, after, I guess it was after George Floyd, right? It was like late 2020 when every sitcom, every movie, everything that had ever done blackface, regardless of context, just removed that episode from streaming. You know, they just swept it out. I think my impulse was to agree with you, though, that this didn't feel malicious. This didn't feel like anything other than a small glimpse at yet another type of conflict that this movie is addressing. I mean, these two people is a white woman and a black man, and I think the black man was American. He spoke English with a not British accent, so he's got a whole nother multiple, at least two countries of experiencing racism. And so, you know, it's just like this. You see them kind of looking at each other, and you see them both being attracted to the other person, but knowing it could never work. And that their first thing that they want once they realize there's this magic is to become the other race so they could be with each other. It's kind of like there's a trope. I remember Seventh Heaven, that old TV show, doing it, but I think it happens a lot where, like, they're low on money and they pawn something of theirs to give the other one a gift, but the thing that they pawned for themselves is a compliment to the gift that the other person was going to give them. Like, she pawns her necklace to buy him a record player, and he pawns his records to buy her the matching earrings or something like that. And that's what this kind of felt like, but with much greater implications. So I love seeing the blackface and whiteface. Like, it wasn't fun to look at, and you kind of had that immediate reaction of like, oh, which I think should be a reaction in seeing that. And I don't know how else they could have expressed that without just doing the full thing. But that level of, like, I don't know, feeling so resigned to your circumstance and then realizing there's a way out and making such a huge sacrifice to just be with the person you love, I thought was really sweet.
Yeah, it was an interesting scene for sure. That's why I did want to just briefly touch upon it, because, like I said, seeing that could be triggering for anyone. It should be. Doesn't matter your race. But I think context does matter for sure.
I think what you have to do is just look at it from sort of that removed critical perspective. You know, obviously, ought to, I would say, make anyone watching it uncomfortable.
Sure.
But then doing that sort of analysis of, like, why, okay, blackface is never okay. Why was it used here? What is the intention? And just sort of trying to understand what's going on from sort of a critical perspective is how I try to approach these things, you know, myself.
And, like, even with the best of intentions, that could obviously never be redone now. No one would ever attempt that, even if it were, you know, what we think De Sica is trying to put across here. And that it's just so brief. You don't see them toiling with the choice. You just see them. They know exactly what they want. They ask for exactly what they want. They go and look for the other one. And then they have the moment of realizing, oh no, this still could never be. So then the bird's gone. And oh, it's heartbreaking. The point where he just points to his face and says black, and, like, just shakes his head, knowing that he can never be with his love. Oh,
I know. Yeah. It's so sad, but it's interesting the way it's brought up in this story with so much going on. Are there any parts of the story, I mean, again, we'll still talk about it, that you wanted to bring up before we move to the second segment?
Oh, well, one thing, I just love how many times people are just shouting numbers in this movie. So there's a lot of, like, counting, shouting math equations at each other, and it's so funny every time. For whatever reason, it's just this movie's obsession with numbers and having characters shout them at each other. Is really funny.
And that the mother on her deathbed is like, "What's this multiplication table?"
Yeah,
you know, like, the last wisdom I can impart upon you is 42.
And then he names all the street signs multiplication problems as well. At least they'll learn something when referring to the street.
It's also it's funny when he would bring up to the kids and they just turn away and be like, I don't want to do math today. And I feel that. So segment 2, just before and after. And in this segment, it's a way to contextualize the film. What did he create after? And what did he create before? What led him to create this film? So what he did right before this in 1948, which was Bicycle Thieves. And this is a film that's known even outside of his name. When you hear about the genre, this is probably the first one that comes up, at least is one that if you Google the genre, is probably the first thing that comes up.
Yeah, certainly.
It's one of the most, well-known films and considered a very important film. At the time, Italians did not like this film because they didn't like the way they were painted in the film. They thought it was in a negative light. Fast forward, it's now considered such an important document of like history and a way for them to look back, but also a way for people outside, like ourselves who are in North America, to look back on their history. And I think it's so cool that a nation was able to create this genre to be like, we are going to remember this and the aftermath and how it affected people, because not a lot of people did a lot of reflection after the war like the Italians did. So I know you've seen Bicycle Thieves. Just wondering how you feel about, that being such an important piece of document and how it led to him creating Miracolo, Milan, and then we'll talk about what he did right after.
Yeah, so you definitely have this sort of portrayal of and common understanding of poverty and the scrappiness of the poor and how they, do what it takes to survive. And so I think you have that's sort of the project, the neorealist project, going on at this time, particularly in De Sica's work. And so you can see that sort of reflected in a different way in this. And I feel honestly like it's just as effective a way, using sort of the humor and the comedy to draw out, rather than drawing out the tragedy of it, drawing out the humor and making audiences identify through, laughter with the causes of these poor people in this shanty town. It's like a different way to get at the same issue. I mean, I love both movies, but they're, different perspectives, certainly different genres, and getting at the same point, and both, equally to me moving in terms of motivating action.
Yeah, I liked that this movie wasn't tragedy porn. Like, it wasn't, I mean, poverty is so hard. Like it doesn't diminish the difficulties, but I think it shows like the really beautiful community that exists here, that it's not only, people trying to help each other, some people more apt to that than others, but the organization that can come about. I mean, that the scene with the lottery for the chicken, I thought was so sweet. That they have a community song was so sweet. I think that there's just this there's this nature within all of us to create community. And this movie, I think, shows that really well. Even though they have so little, they're operating on such scarcity, that this idea of protecting one another, and then kind of that to being confronted with this capitalist petroleum baron to be, because you don't really see that so much in Bicycle Thieves, if I'm remembering correctly. You don't see a lot of like conflict between upper class and lower class. You just see plights of lower class within Bicycle Thieves. And so I think to kind of have this compare and contrast between motives and desires within, I mean, because you see the rich guy come and he buys the land, and because he thinks the land is useless, he's so willing to be so philanthropic with it. Let them stay here, all these things. I'm not going to give them any money or any buildings or any safety, but here's the land for you. And the second he finds out that the land is of value, it's over for this community. And so I think to show kind of some of the good sides of not that anybody would desire poverty, but what isn't horrible about communities like we see in this movie, and then what is horrible about capitalist endeavors, I think is really powerful in this one.
No, I agree. And there's quite a few things that you both brought up that I had listed down in the kind of trademarks section, which we'll chat about in like a couple minutes. I do want to hold on to that.
We keep jumping all over your plan. I'm so
No,
sorry.
no. I do that myself. That's just the way the segments are broken out. That's good that we're on the same page, to be honest. But yeah, the way, like I mentioned before, he wanted to make something that was a little bit more lighthearted and had a little bit more humor. Because there's a couple scenes in here where I like genuinely laughed. And like his background before he became a director, he was an actor and he became a pretty popular comedic actor. So you can see him bringing that, and he does bring it. He does create full-on comedies at some point too in his career. But there's a couple scenes in this that did make me laugh. One in particular is when Edwidge is getting kind of reamed out by her boss, and because of the spilling of the water, and he spills water on himself. And the guy's like, "It took me a full hour to fill up this bucket." And I just like burst out laughing because I was like, "Yeah." That's so funny. But then he goes back after this and does Umberto D, which I love, but it's incredibly sad also. You know, it involves there's three things that usually make me sad. Things that involving children, things involving animals, and elderly people. This is involving two of those three. And again, probably up there with Bicycle Thieves. Probably his second most known film, the one that he said he's most proud of, and he dedicated to his own father. It's along the same lines as Bicycle Thieves. You know, it's like you said, it's more about the plights of the lower class, in quotes, as opposed to an outside conflict. So he does return to that. And then he, throughout his career, goes back and forth on it. But it's weird that Miracle Milan, I think it is getting a bit more traction because it's been released by Criterion Collection, but it's still not top of mind when you hear about De Sica. And it's I do find it funny that it's kind of sandwiched in between like his two biggest ones. But this is the one that gives people the most hope, I'd say, out of all the films of his that I've seen, for sure.
Yeah, with the Umberto D, I mean, you can see really in Bicycle Thieves, you don't, it's not looking at the elderly really. But then you can see in Miracle in Milan, some of these side characters are older, and you can see him start, the wheels turning about like, okay, what has poverty done to elderly people in Italy, in the late 40s, early 50s. And so then for him to really go back to that like pure neorealist style after this and explore that issue that was sort of untackled from Bicycle Thieves, but you can see him sort of start to think about it in real time here in this film from a different perspective is neat.
No, I agree, which is like a perfect segue into the third segment and just talking about his trademarks, what themes he likes to often explore and ideas. And we've touched on quite a bit of it. Just wanted to start this one off for the audience who might not know. We've kind of talked about what Italian neorealism is, but it's often about horror and working class, and they're filmed on location, and a lot of times they'd use non-professional actors, and it's really talking about what happened to the average person after the war, because there's a lot of physical destruction after a war, but there's also a lot of mental destruction after that. People have lost people, the jobs are not there, their homes might not be there. So that's what that genre of film tackles, and what De Sica really made his name as a director making. But there are people, when I was reading some articles on it, who were questioning, is this a neorealist film? Because it isn't essentially super sad. And there's that element of not even realism, but fantasy in this. I still think it's a neorealist film. And I don't think that all neorealism needs to be super depressing. And I think that's why people question, is this one? I think he's using a mix of professional, non-professional. It's all shot on that junkyard that they didn't create that. That's an actual junkyard that they're shooting on. And it is talking about, the lives of people after the war. So it has all those elements. It's just, not making you sob in the way that Umberto D is going to. How do you guys feel about, those elements, and whether you think, and obviously things could be mixed genre, but I do think it fits within.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think that, obviously because the world is hard, neorealism films will have the tendency to be heavy and hard. I think that's more of, was it causation versus correlation? Like, I think that it's not that a movie has to tug at your heartstrings and make you question humanity to be a neorealistic film. I think it needs to touch on a lot of themes, but something that's also real is hope and community. And so if this movie were just you being beat down, everyone's in it for themselves, sure, those things are true, but neorealism films aren't just about the bad bits of humanity and society. It can't ignore them, but again, I think I confessed at the beginning, I just looked up definition. But I mean, like
no, but you're right.
It more just puts words to what I kind of assumed already existed. But this idea, like you said, like obviously there are elements of this that are more fantastical. There maybe are a little more hyperbolic.
Yeah.
But it doesn't ever feel like it's describing a society and a humanity that cannot exist in real life.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a poorly named genre, to be honest. It's not because it's not like, and I think people hear neorealism, they hear non-professional actors, and you have in your mind like, oh, this is like trying to be as true to life as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's the case with De Sica or Rossellini either. They're doing more, non-professional actors, you think of like Bresson and doing like hundreds of takes and trying to get it as real as possible, remove any artifice or emotion. That's not really what's going on here as much. It's a bit melodramatic. There are heightened emotions and stakes. You've got the supernatural elements in this one. There's a lot more going on in terms of layers other than just like, let's make this as real as possible. It's not really that. Yeah, I mean, there are elements of that, and it's certainly like a reaction to some of the other stuff that is maybe less real or more Hollywood, but it's not like entirely like trying to be exactly like what life is necessarily.
I mean, even with the Bresson, like doing a bunch of takes, is it really real? Because at this point you've rehearsed it.
Yeah.
You're doing hundreds of takes. It's hard to do that mix, and I think that's why out of all the, neorealist directors or ones that are considered, I feel like De Sica is my favorite because he does have that hope. Like you guys are saying, so hope and community, which is a huge part of this. And what I like about this is that, yes, everyone seems like they're having a somewhat good time and there's community and they're singing, dancing and stuff, but it's not making it seem like these are all innocent people. They're all still very real. And we have those moments like when he wins the chicken in the lottery and someone's like, oh, can you share? And he's like, no. He eats the whole chicken by himself. And then when they start asking for their wishes, and they often just asking for one thing, and that's great. But then you have to get some sort of realism in there. People are going to start asking for dollars, and they're going to start asking for millions. Because I'm surprised it took them that long to get to that.
Yeah.
So there is still an element of greed, but how much is it greed when you don't have anything at all? So I do like the idea that he's not trying to make these people seem as though they're fully innocent. They're still multifaceted people who have needs and wants, and they're as valid as people who have the means. And I like that he is saying that innocence can carry on into adulthood, especially with Toto.
Yeah.
He's an innocent character, but I think he's smart enough not to be taken advantage, which is what I love about his character. But I'm curious to hear more about your thoughts on how he tackles the character's needs and wants when they have very little.
Yeah. So you start out, Toto is interesting because you start out where he does really seem like pretty naive, and a lot of the sequences when he like first comes out of the orphanage as an adult and is walking around is like not understanding how social conventions work, sort of stuff. But then you see him really become a leader, how to engage with people, and his kindness really shines throughout. So I think you do sort of get there, and he's certainly not as naive by the end of the movie. He's learned a lot and sort of adapted to the world that he is living in, but not lost his kindness.
I think also that scene of him leaving the orphanage that Bryan mentioned, where he says good morning to someone and the guy's like, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
That he's able to create a community based on the things that he wants to exist in society. That he's able to kind of start a new society from nothing, more or less. Like, obviously, these people have lived lives, but the way he brings together people, the way that he's able to establish kindness and goodness and generosity, even with so little. And then it's at the end, what is it? A land where good morning really means good morning. Like, he's taken the things that he knows to be good. He's removed the things that he most recently understands to be bad, and he creates a new community out of it. And I just think it's really sweet. You're right that there are some come to terms with what the real world is that he has to go through, but for the most part, he really is able to establish authority through kindness and good decision making that benefits the whole versus the individual. And how he's able to do that is amazing to me, because that could be very quickly manipulated and taken away from him. But that he has enough people around him who are like, I don't know, willing to follow him because of his goodness and the way that he creates goodness for everyone around him. Pretty cool. I'm down with that. He can come run our country. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Maybe not your country, but our country for sure.
Oh, I know. Canada needs it too, to be honest. But like you said, it's one where you are watching this and you're like, that would be great if people were to listen to someone who's like, let's not use violence to resolve things. Is it realistic in this day and age? In the day and age that this is made, also not really, but it's nice to see. And that's the power of film. Sometimes you can have a happy ending. One of the parts I want to talk about, just kind of still on the neorealism piece, is often those films kind of have a grittier look because of the resources and just trying to make things look as realistic to the way it was in those parts of Italy. But this one, he used a cinematographer, Aldo, who worked on a lot of melodramas, and I feel like that's really seen in this. It looks beautiful, and I know we probably both watched the Criterion release, so there's obviously been a bit of work done to it, but there's an element of storytelling, and I know we keep bringing up fable, but I think that's the best word to describe it. It feels like a storybook that you're watching, and the way the camera moves and the framing, I just couldn't believe how beautiful it looked. And it really is telling you at the end of the day, like, this is a film. I'm not trying to make it seem like there is a community out there that's like this. It would be nice if there was, but I'm just giving you some hope that maybe one day we can get there. So it's not trying to lie to you. And I think it's really important that he chose this cinematographer and to shoot it this way. I'm wondering how you guys feel about the look and the feel, especially compared to something like a Bicycle Thieves that was only done a couple of years before, but visually looks super different.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Like you mentioned, this restoration is phenomenal. You know, it looked amazing, particularly for these neorealist filmmakers. Were not working with large budgets. You know, you're mostly shooting outside because it's cheap to do rather than having like a soundstage or interior. But yeah, you get this sense with the cinematographer of very intentional choices that are a little bit more, you know, drawing attention to the filmmaking rather than just sort of shooting plainly. But it all has intention along with, you know, all of the effects that are done that are obviously drawing attention to you're watching a film rather than like sitting in real life. So you feel that intention, and it really suits this movie. It would not suit Bicycle Thieves, but it suits this movie.
Yeah. No, I agree. It kind of, it just feels like it kind of feels sparkly a little bit around the end. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I mean, I think, you know, you mentioning that reminds me of like the scenes where the ray of sun comes down, they all run over to it, and it does kind of sparkle, the ray of sun. I thought that was so sweet. It's just, it's a very sweet movie.
And I think that ray of sun where it's, spatially not big and they have to huddle together for warmth. It's such a cool precursor to like, you can get the sun and you can stand by yourself, or you can get the sun and you can stand and have the body heat of everyone around you. And so we all have the same resources, but they're made greater by working together.
Yeah.
Beautiful picture.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, one of the last things I wanted to talk about, and feel free to bring up any last thoughts as well. This rate, we've been watching a film go by, and I'm wondering how, especially when you first watch it, how they're going to wrap this up, because they need to leave their space. The way they leave the space is very interesting. It's full-blown fairy tale at this point. There's no realism left in this film. Again, I think it earns it. Could not pull this off today because people would roll their eyes, but I think it's so beautifully done, and it takes a lot of talent, I think, to earn an ending where people are just going off on broomsticks.
Yes.
So what do you feel about that ending and that image?
Yeah, I think you've had enough wild stuff going on with all of the like wish granting, the like dispersal of the smoke, which was the only thing that I couldn't really like figure out how they did. It seemed like there was like a smoke that was reversed, but then the people who were around were definitely like the film was played forward. So I have no idea how they did that one, and I didn't look it up, but it was a neat effect. So you've got all of these elements, but then all of the like, the station wagons breaking down, them jumping on broomsticks and flying off into the sky is just like a fun, you are in full fantasy mode at this point, and you do sort of want that happy ending for these characters. So I thought it was a really fun way to end.
Yeah, it was fun. They're just too good for this world. So they're going to go make their own world somewhere else. That's my decision.
Yeah.
I don't know. I agree. I was like, I don't know how this is going to end, because I know how this would end in the real world, and that's depressing. So hopefully they're not going to like throw them in jail on fake vagrancy charges and them saddled with court fees for the rest of their lives and increase their poverty they'll never climb out of, which is what would really happen. So it was nice to kind of have this like ethereal, definitely not neorealistic ending to the movie. I thought it was fun. It's like a nice way of like, let's just move past it.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't all need to, face the truth at all times.
Right.
So, yeah. Are there any last bits that we want to discuss before we move to the very, very last segment?
Well, you mentioned that the screenwriter was a communist. I think you could see some of those, particularly in the rich characters, and then the police being the enforcers for the rich. Like how all of that is done is very, for a movie from the 50s, it's like, yeah, this is great. I enjoyed those elements, and it feels pretty modern in that regard.
Yeah, some things have never, and probably, who knows, will ever change. It'll take a long time for it to change, but I like how it was portrayed, but that they weren't like a huge part of the story, because all the other characters are much more interesting than
certainly
the people that we're not supposed to like and we don't like. So I did appreciate that.
I thought it was really interesting what the people in the community asked for when they realized the dove could grant wishes. Like the short-sighted materialistic thing of like, I want fancy dresses. I want a fur-trimmed coat and a top hat. No one thought like, I want an actual house to live in. I want stability. I want the deed to this land to be given to us. Like there was, I think the short-sightedness was really interesting. I don't know how exactly I'm supposed to feel about it. I just found that something like interesting to think about.
Yeah.
On that note as well, you don't see throughout the movie to that point, you see them have unfulfilled desires and longings that they're then like wishing can be granted, but they're not like, they're doing fine. We've got like, they don't have a lot of wealth, but they've built this community, this shanty town. They don't need, outside wealth. Don't see them like really hurting to survive or live happy lives. But then when that becomes available, that sort of greed mindset and scarcity mindset kicks in of like, I've got to have all of the wealth and all of these things in a way that makes the characters a little uglier. So that it is a really interesting element there that I think has some pretty insightful like social implications,
And that the first thing Toto should have wished for was a humane dove carrying device where he could not have to hold the dove in his hand and put it on windowsills, but that he could like have a little like a little papoose like sling for it where it was like held safely.
Yeah.
Or Bryan made like why he didn't use the dove to make 10 more doves.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But of course here's us about longevity and capitalism and all that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. It's like getting, the wish from the genies and not asking for more wishes. Yeah. Unlimited wishes.
Well, it was interesting. I a couple years ago I did a little bit of work with one of the unhoused missions in Nashville, and we did like a training on just kind of what deep financial insecurity and poverty does towards your mindset, and like concepts of time and concepts of like permanence become really, really warped. And so you come into money and the idea to like invest the money, not like stock market invest it, but put it towards savings, put it towards living expenses isn't necessarily like your first impulse. It changes impulses. And like, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting nice things, particularly when you're in the depths of poverty and just like want to feel pretty like that level of dignity and pride, like still exists despite your circumstance. And so, but the pragmatic person in me is like, hey, build roads, plumbing systems, find ways to like capture this petroleum. Also, did it not make you stressed out that one of the biggest petroleum spurt things was like 6 feet from the chicken coop? Like, would you eat those eggs? I wouldn't.
That whole situation where you can poke into the ground and all of a sudden oil starts like spurting up, or petroleum or whatever. It's so stressful to me.
And it's conveniently not on the ground of any of their homes. It's in the roads.
It is it's a once upon a time thing where you can just poke into the ground and there's petroleum, unlimited wealth available for you.
Exactly. And I'm like, there's children running around. That was my first thought.
Or the fat cat's assistant comes out and he sticks his hand in it and then he licks it. And you're like, brother, ridiculous. He's like, oh, yeah. Or that they thought it was water. Doesn't petroleum have a very strong smell?
Yeah, I think they would smell that. Yeah. So
they're not too bright. But of course, they've been living on a petroleum field for a while. Maybe their brains are addled. Maybe it's all like a toxic fumes dream.
Wow.
So they're not actually flying on brooms. Their brains
that
are
is a
melted.
Wild interpretation of
Wow, I really just made this depressing, didn't you?
I was gonna say it could be, but then I'm sad. I'm like, oh gosh, are they all just kind of sitting there and like oh gosh. I mean, who knows?
Was it really a dove? Anyway.
I mean, there were moments of that where I'm like, are they dreaming this sequence specifically like within the film too? But I like to just think, they had a happy time at the end. So
it was very sparkly.
I know. It really was.
Maybe they're all just at the end. There's just a shot of them they're in their little sunspot huddled together and they start moving more and more slowly and then the sun just goes out. Anyway.
That's the alternative cut.
Did I ruin this movie?
Hey, that's the near-realist in you coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. You never win when you're the oppressed class.
Sadly not. Yeah. But, that was Miracle in Milan. I thought it's a great one to open up the series with. I have one last question, still thinking about the themes in the film and, making a double bill with this, whether you'd want to make one that is very similar in visual style or thematic style. What film or films, if you have more than one, would you pair Miracle in Milan with?
Well, I thought of Alice Rohrwacher's film, Happy as Lazzaro, which is a more recent film. She's an Italian director as well. And this film is actually on Netflix to watch, but it has a lot of similarities to the point where when I was watching Miracle in Milan, I was like, oh, this was definitely an influence on Verwatcher making this film. So you've got this like wise fool trope. It's a little more extreme in Lazzaro than it is in Miracle in Milan, but Lazzaro is certainly like the wise fool in that it deals a lot with class and wealth and exploitation in a way that was quite similar. You've got this sort of idea of displacement in both films where the poor or the marginalized get sort of moved around a lot. Yeah, them both being, Italian directors, it was like, okay, I can see sort of the lineage here. So that would be my my double bill.
That's good. I had a couple, but I'll give you my thoughts, but probably just share one. So, because there's a lot of different, like, I'm definitely more of a themes person in my double billing, because story is where I tend to go to. So you could look at like rich versus poor. You could look at poverty in general. You could look at reflection. There's a lot magic. There's lots of things. I think that what about this movie I found most affected me was what the community looks like. So I think where I'm going to go with this, I'm debating. I think where I would double bill this is with Nomadland.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Where, I mean, I really loved that movie, first of all, but it so well looks at, how to exist in poverty, how to exist and maybe rejecting what is expected, which maybe wasn't necessarily the choice of the people within this community, but and then how in Nomadland, like what that community does look like, how you care for each other with very limited resources and how you get by creatively. So I think that's my answer.
Also a movie that features non-professional actors.
Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah.
Love it.
And Frances McDormand is an international treasure. Treasure.
Those are both good choices. I hadn't seen Brian's choice. I haven't seen that one yet.
Have you seen La Chimera?
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
Even better. Yeah. So, but Verwatcher, I think she is like gonna just create like 20 great films. I'm so excited to see her career. I think she is excellent.
That's good to hear. I'm really bad at catching up with the newer stuff, so I need to watch those. I did see Nomadland. I liked it a lot. I know it got. With all Oscar movies, there's all a bunch of hate after.
Sure.
It wins the Oscar.
If you win Best Picture, you're going to get some blowback,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that would be a good pairing for this as well, especially, putting it into a modern world and seeing how things have changed and how things haven't changed. So those are both good choices. I had a few, but the one I'm going to stick with it's called Yo-Yo. It's a French film from 1965 by a director called Perretet, and it's mostly silent, but this is a silent film on purpose, because it's made in the 60s. And it's interesting. It's more towards the fantastical elements of this film. It's done throughout decades, and the way the characters dress and the technology that the characters have evolved. So it starts in like the 20s and goes up until think like the 60s, and you can see the different things. He starts in the circus, and then he evolves, and eventually he's in TV. And the way that works, I think he must have also watched this film, because you can see a lot of elements of Miracle in Milan in that film. And it's one that I saw maybe a couple of years ago for the first time, didn't really know anything about it, and it blew my mind. I just cannot believe how they managed to create this film. So I think if you like the special effects portion of this film and the supernatural bits, and you want to continue watching something like that, I would recommend Yo-Yo. It's really, really good. It's very sweet also.
I love a sweet movie.
I have not seen that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
I think you'd like it.
We had Yee Yee on the Sight and Sound list.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely not as long as Yee Yee.
That's fair.
It's a little tighter. Speaking of, this is also a very tight, for all this that happens in this movie, it's like 91 minutes or something.
Exactly the length it needs to be.
Literally, that's my preferred length. 90 minutes is the perfect amount of time for a movie.
Yeah, I'm tired. I got a lot of life to live. I can't spend it watching movies.
And that's what De Sica is like. You got to go live your life now after this.
Take this.
Give me 90 minutes.
Yeah. Think about these things as you continue on in life.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, yeah, I think this one and Bicycle Thieves both were very easy to talk about.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another neo-realistic thing. Like the themes are clear. What it wants you to have discussion about after the fact is it doesn't give you the answers, but it gives you like, here's what's to ponder on. And they're pondering on things that are very natural to most human experiences. So thanks, De Sica.
Yeah.
He's still alive?
No, but he's still alive in our hearts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He will live on.
Well, Bryan and Hannah, this is perfect. I am so glad I got you guys on again and to talk about a really nice movie, especially, the series I will have just wrapped up after before this one starts is Hanukkah, who is kind of the opposite of De Sica in that way. So it's nice to talk about something that makes me smile instead of kind of hate my life a little bit. So I am so happy to have you on again, and everyone needs to go listen to What a Picture. All the links will be in the show notes, and they have a wealth of episodes talking about the best films.
Yeah.
There's no excuse, but thank you so much for coming back on. I really appreciate it.
This is always so fun.
Great to speak with.
Yeah, you make a great show, Felicia. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. Of course. Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia and Roney, with intro music by Lamar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast. And stay tuned for our next episode on Shoe Shine. Watch more movies, and I'll see you next time.